Welcome to the ETF's Learning Connects live session. Today, the focus is on the role of civil society organisation in national skills development. Why are civil society organisations important for national skills development? Are they needed more in current times than before? What can they do and what can they bring to national skills development strategies? In what way do cultural and societal factors influence civil society contribution to skills? And how can civil society engagement in skills development and delivery be optimised? To answer these questions, let's welcome our guests today. We have Mairead O'Connor, Skills Development Senior Manager, The Wheel, Ireland's National Association of Charities, Community Groups and Social Enterprises. Welcome, Mairead.
Hi, Denise. Thank you.
And we have Andrew Bell, Head of OECD Skills Strategy Projects and Deputy Head of the OECD Centre for Skills. Welcome, Andrew.
Welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And we also have Siria Taurelli, Senior Human Capital Development Expert, Coordinator for Governance and Quality Assurance from the European Training Foundation. Welcome, Siria.
Welcome. Thank you.
And I'm your host today, Denise Loughran, ETF Communications Specialist. Before beginning, a warm welcome to you, our audience, everyone who's joining us today. Please engage in the conversation, post your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll be happy to pick them up. We are live today on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on X. So let's get started. I'll start with you, Andrew. Andrew, maybe you can set the scene for us and describe to us what is the role of civil society organisations in national skills development?
Thank you. Since the skills people possess have important implications for their economic and social outcomes, such as employment, wages, trust, and participation in society, civil society organizations naturally have an interest in helping people and communities they serve to develop strong skill sets, and once they develop those, to make sure that they're used fully and effectively. And there's a number of important roles that civil society organizations can play to ensure that this actually happens. That is to say, to ensure that people do develop the right skills and have opportunities actually to use them. First, organizations can advocate for policies that could lead to better skills outcomes. Since these organizations are mission-driven, typically existing to respond to societal problems and advocate for change, especially on behalf of the most marginalized, they're ideally placed to act as strong advocates for those who often face the greatest challenges with respect to developing and using their skills. Second, these organizations can undertake research and analysis to benefit the people they serve. A prerequisite, of course, for effective advocacy is, of course, a good understanding of the barriers that people face to developing and using skills in the first place, as well as understanding what some of the factors are that can help them to overcome these challenges. Since these organizations are indeed mission-driven and are generally in close contact with the people they serve, they are, of course, in a good position to understand what these barriers and enablers are. Third, these organizations can be important partners in the delivery of skills programs and services. Once again, their close contact with and knowledge of some of the most marginalized groups position them well to reach out to these people, inform them about available programs and services, and encourage them to take advantage of them. And it positions them well to deliver training programs to help these people to further develop their skills, as well as to provide them with career counseling, job search, placement services, etc., to help them find jobs and where they can use those skills. This capacity of civil society organizations should be increasingly important to policymakers in the context of population aging and the twin and digital and green transitions, which are combining to create skill shortages in many countries. And which, as a consequence, are raising interest in pools of talent that are not currently being fully tapped into. The sorts of people that many community service organizations or civil service organizations work with, such as the Roma, indigenous populations, migrants, women in certain contexts, and persons with disabilities, to name just a few examples. And finally, and for similar reasons, once again, civil society organizations are well placed to assess the impact of skills policies on the people and communities they serve, and to communicate this to policymakers so that these policies can be refined and improved. So in other words, these civil society organizations can play a sort of evaluation kind of role to ensure that policies actually meet the needs of the people they serve in their communities. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. That's a very comprehensive introduction you've given us. You've described how they are, advocates for those who are disadvantaged, but not only, they're important for research, they're partners in skills development, and also in the evaluation. So I would turn to Mairead now, and my question is, but why are we focusing on this now? Are civil society organizations, have they not been traditionally seen as partners in national skills development?
Thanks, Denise, and thanks to Andrew as well. That is a very good kind of overview of the value that's brought to the table by CSOs. But I think there have been times when civil society organizations have not been at the table when it comes to conversations around skills at a national level. And I think there's probably a number of things that feed into that. One of them is sometimes the conversation around skills is very narrow and it becomes focused purely on supply and demand, something that enterprises are looking for and something that education and training providers can deliver. So it becomes kind of, I suppose, disconnected from the human at the center, the person on whom with whom the skills are actually the kind of a central part of their own identity. And I think if the person gets lost, then it's very easy for the civil society organizations also to get lost in the conversation if we don't have a holistic person-centered conversation around skills. And that, of course, will lead to policy interventions also failing, I think. So, it's very important that we don't lose sight of that. Civil society organizations aren't always very well understood either in different contexts of policy. If it doesn't appear like they're directly commenting on it or directly involved in the development or delivery in the policy space. And sometimes, that's true of this conversation, because it's very much dominated often by the very large scale, often statutory or governmental suppliers, for example, like universities and higher education providers or further vocational education providers, and civil society voices can get lost there in that as well. One of the things as well that maybe isn't always well understood is the scale of civil society organizations. They're very big employers in their own right, the sector as a whole,
Yes.
and can often and have that reach into communities as well beyond that themselves. Some of the things that we have found have helped to support an intervention in the conversation are things like building research and evidence, an evidence base around skills and the understanding of the skills conversation from the perspective of civil society. So kind of building a knowledge base that civil society can comment from. We also obviously, kind of simply engaging with policymakers, making
Yes.
sure that civil society organizations are addressing this policy area. And building coalitions in order to do that from within the sector. We have found that very useful, I think, in an Irish context. We work very closely with partner organisations in adult and community education, the likes of an organisation called AINTIS in Ireland. The National Adult Literacy Agency is another organisation we partner with, and many others in youth and in other kind of community development spaces as well. And that helps to create, I suppose, a unified voice for the sector on some of these issues.
Okay, thank you, Mairead. But would you say that this, the creation, being able to create an evidence base for civil societies to do this, would this not require a certain level of evolution in their standing, let's say, within national level, to the extent to which stakeholders engage?
I suppose probably the biggest barrier is about investment, actually, because obviously creating evidence and carrying out research actually requires quite an investment of time, money, expertise. And that's probably the biggest barrier is if civil society doesn't have the resources in order to do that, well, then it can't make a space for itself at the table. It can't actually raise itself into the conversation, as you say, in terms of being kind of respected as a stakeholder. But that is that is one of the biggest barriers, is the resourcing piece.
Okay, thank you. I think this will come up further along in our discussion. For now, I'll just say hello to those who have joined us. We have Sarah Lauza Niguas watching from the Philippines. Welcome, Sarah. We have Anna Zakarian from Albania. Welcome, Anna. And so please write your questions, and our guests will be happy to respond to them. So moving on to you now, Siria. What can you tell us about the role of civil society organisations in ETF's partner countries and the countries neighbouring the European Union?
Civil society organizations play a role, are very active in skills development in all countries, including partner countries. The ETF has carried out studies in 7 of neighboring countries. And when we speak about the services that these organizations provide to different groups of populations and communities, as well as the approach they use, we found strong similarity with what civil society organizations do and provide in the EU and internationally. We found services like non-formal learning to young people and adult people, career counseling, support for the transition from learning or training onto employment, advocacy, and so on. So in that, the similarities are greater than differences. However, if we focus on the participation of civil society organizations in the policy dialogue about skills, education, training, the situations vary depending on several reasons. In some of the countries, the interviewed CSOs reported practices of regular dialogue with public authorities, including with national policy makers. In other countries, we have opposite situation where the dialogue remains very occasional, say not really happening on a regular basis because there are limited opportunities offered by the government to consult with non-governmental organizations, or there can also be lack of interest on the part of some organizations, civil society organizations, who rather prefer to focus their own work and resources and expertise on the projects on the grounds directly with the communities they serve. Yet in other cases, we can observe lack of trust, which is prevailing from both sides, or a combination of these factors. So here is really where we can observe a diversity of situations. If we can quote examples, we have, for example, in Ukraine, a platform called the Civil Platform established at the level of Ministry of Education and Science, dedicated to interaction with civil society organizations. On the other hand, Uzbekistan is a country where there is no much traditional of such a regular dialogue. Other countries have mixed of the experiences, like Serbia, for example, who is swinging from a tradition of established, well-developed dialogue towards a different directions. But all in all, we can say that in all countries, the 7 countries covered by the ETF study, we observe they all show that interaction between governments and civil society organizations at the level of skills strategies and policy development is subject to improvement. There is room to do more in that respect.
Thank you, Siria. So if I have understood you properly, you would say that there's greater variation in the role of civil societies at national level in terms of how they bridge, let's say, and link with policy.
Correct. Whereas at the level of activities and the type of activities and services, they provide to individuals and communities, we find great similarities across the board, partner countries, EU, international experience. But when it goes to actual and active involvement in policy dialogue, this is where we see the biggest differences. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Siria. Mairead, just to come to you on that point, so how do you think that civil society organizations can help themselves, to engage further? We touched on this in response to your previous question, but to engage further in national skills development based on your experience in Ireland?
I mean, I suppose it does. It requires concerted effort. It's not going to happen by, I guess, unless the civil society organizations are willing to invest the time, the expertise in it. And that's one thing that we have found. It has taken us many years to get to the position where we're in today, where we have, I suppose, been able to see a result from our engagement. So it takes quite a lot of time, and I guess that's something it has to be prioritized. And I think some of that is done through the kind of building of coalitions and having conversations within the sector itself, and then engaging with policymakers to ensure, as Siria has outlined there, that CSOs are included in all the important fora, whether that's locally for an organization that's maybe working on the ground, that's engaging with the service providers locally, or maybe then at a regional level, or with national organizations like ourselves and others who operate across the entire ecosystem, that we're engaging at the national level with policymakers and making sure that we have a seat at the various fora that have an impact.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn to Andrew now, if you could elaborate more on that question, really. What can they do to help themselves, civil society organizations? From Mairead's response, I understood, okay, they need to be better engaged, resourced, consulted, but what can they do to ensure this, please?
Yeah, it was a good question because, of course, obviously civil society organizations can only effectively play the roles that we've been discussing if they have the capacity and the opportunity to engage in policy dialogue. And I think that's been implicit in what Siria and Mairead have been talking about. And I think also implicit in what they've been saying is that it's especially challenging for civil society organizations to get a seat at the public policy table in countries, especially where there's not a strong history of collaboration between government and these organizations. And even where there is a formal requirement for government to consult with stakeholders when developing policy, policymakers may want to ensure that consultations are manageable in scope. And as a result, civil society organizations are often overlooked, or officials may engage only with selected organizations that they already know well. And these selected organizations may be important and they may be well established, and but they may not represent the diversity of the sector. And by extension, because of that, they may not also represent the interests of certain groups of people that have need for further development of their skills. Perhaps the most important thing, coming to your question, that civil society organizations can do to ensure that they have a seat at the table is to follow the example of what social partners do to ensure their inclusion, which is to establish umbrella organizations that represent their collective needs and perspectives, and by extension, help to raise their voice. And it doesn't need to be a single organization. It could be multiple organizations for that matter. The organization that Mairead represents in the Wheel in Ireland, I think, provides us with a very good example of this. When we worked on a skills strategy project in Ireland, for example, government officials there informed us that the Wheel was an important stakeholder that we needed to speak with to better understand the skills challenges and possible solutions in that country, as well as to better understand the skills needs of the sector itself. So that in itself shows a success. And I'm sure that Mairead could expand upon that further and tell us what it took to get to that point. And I'm sure it didn't happen quickly, but still you see the example of such efforts. Yet another action that civil society organizations can take is to advocate for the establishment of formal institutions that ensure that they and other stakeholders are engaged regularly in public policy dialogue, because that doesn't often happen in many countries. This could include the Skills Fora that Mairead mentioned, and which includes such things as national, regional skills councils or sector councils that have as part of their mandate to convene stakeholders, including civil society organizations, to discuss skills policy. A national skills strategy can also be an excellent vehicle for fostering dialogue among relevant ministries, of course, but also between government and stakeholders, including civil society organizations. The OECD has worked with more than 25 economies now internationally to help them to develop skills strategies. And when we do this, we do encourage governments to work closely with stakeholders, including civil society organizations, to benefit from the knowledge and insight of all those actors and to build up support for policy reform. So encouraging governments to engage broadly to develop national skills strategies can indeed be another effective way to get civil society organizations involved in the policy dialogue. But I don't, of course, want to suggest that that just happens automatically. Mm-hmm. Finally, I think that the sector is more likely to have a seat at the table if they're able to make a clear and compelling case for why they matter. For example, by explaining how their work contributes to better economic and social outcomes. So speaking, I understand that, that civil society organizations are about more than what government officials see as their role, but indeed understanding what the interests of the government is and other stakeholders, of course, is important in ensuring that they do get that seat at the table and then have opportunities to talk about the other important roles that civil society organizations play as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Just maybe to follow up on something you said about the point of setting up, for instance, sector skills councils, just to be a little bit provocative, but what would you say? I've heard some criticisms, let's say in certain cases in previous discussions, that in instances where they have been set up, other stakeholders are maybe not so happy with the contribution of civil society organizations. Would you like to give me your thoughts on why this could happen and how civil society organizations maybe could address this?
Well, it's hard for me to speak about without knowing the circumstances in those particular places, but it could be, again, that they're not speaking the same language, like understanding that audience of what it is that government is really, actors are really interested in, and understanding how to pitch, so to speak, their to that particular audience, but not undermining at the same time what it is that they hold, what their mission is, and hold a value to them. As I mentioned, I think understand, making that case for what are their impacts and how that benefits society as a whole, individuals, I think can be helpful. But it's hard for me to talk about that without knowing the specific context, because I think generally I found that people are interested in what civil society organizations have to say. I think, though, however, that sometimes they don't understand the broader role that civil society organizations can play. They kind of compartmentalize them as delivery agents and don't see them so much as actually having an important role in the development of skills policies. So I think perhaps informing the other stakeholders of the value they have in that perspective can help.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Turning to you now, Siria, and also following on from what Andrew has just told us. So how would you say civil society organizations in ETF partner countries, then, with all the variations that exist, how can they better organize themselves and make sure their voice is heard?
Well, I would say, Denise, that building partnerships is very important, both at national and a local level. Partnerships that are motivated by the enhancement of people's skills can be initiated among civil society organizations themselves, those who are active in a similar area of work. But with this same motivation about skills development, the partnerships can also develop with other actors. And here I link also with what Andrew and you were just describing, other actors such as social partners with whom the civil society organizations share similar objectives in terms of skills development. So within the environment of civil society, but also outside this environment, and it's very important to break these barriers. I want to underline that when we speak about partnerships, this is about a stable relationship, a stable collaboration, as opposed to occasional collaboration in one single activity and so on. But really, partnership is something more that provides more continuity and creates a mutual understanding as it develops. The local level, it was also mentioned earlier, it's where often these partnerships are formed. So this is an area, a level to consider where to start from. And these partnerships at local level are based on the deep knowledge about the needs of the communities in that specific territory. This is a very important. And again, locally is where dialogue with the public authorities is more intense, is often based on more opportunities of interaction, of consultations and discussions. And this, of course, facilitates greatly nurturing common actions based on this type of partnerships. Not only that, the local level is also a source of innovation. This is said in the literature, but also we can observe it through the empirical evidence. And this innovation, it regards two aspects. I mean, it takes place in two ways. On one hand, the pedagogy, so by making use on untraditional teaching and learning, by innovating the learning environment, the different use of spaces, also outside the typical classrooms. But on the other hand, the innovation also takes place in terms of cooperation mechanism between these different actors, including the CSOs, the public agencies, local authorities, companies, and local employment offices, social partners.
Okay, Siria, sorry, would you like to share some examples with us?
Yes, I mean, the ETF has documented these experimental dimensions through, for example, the study on public-private partnerships, where in Serbia, just to quote one example, we found a partnership between, in a region at sub-national level, between local municipal authorities, public employment services, civil society organizations, and local companies for facilitating internships and apprenticeships for vulnerable young people. So it was thanks to the active involvement and I would say the initiative of civil society organization that acted as a mediator between all these different parties, that it was possible not only to identify but really accompany young people with coming from a less advantaged background, coming in to be welcomed and hosted by local companies for their internships. So this is really a virtuous example, but there are many others in terms of this multi-actor, multiple type of partnerships.
Okay, thank you, Siria. I'll say hello now to Rupa from Detroit, Michigan. Welcome, Rupa. Thanks for joining us. And please post any comments and questions you may have. Okay, turning to you now, Mairead. And following on from what Siria just mentioned, this experimentation and innovation that often exists at local level. I mean, what can be done to ensure that this bubbles up to the surface to national level?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and that's the big challenge, I think, Denise. And it was a very good example that Siria gave there, and it just crossed my mind that that's the danger, I suppose, that there is innovation happening across sectors at a local level, but in our experience, civil society organizations have not traditionally been involved in large-scale formal knowledge sharing exchanges across sectors. To the same extent as other partners like academic institutions and private firms. So we haven't been invited into those spaces and places as often. And I think that there is I suppose a lot to be gained from that, because there's so much innovation happening in civil society organizations, around social and environmental challenges. And I guess we're in danger of losing some of that, and especially as well in the kind of human-centered approach that CSOs specialize in. We're going to require a lot of that within the 21st century workforce. And again, CSOs have a lot to give, right across other sectors too, a lot that could be shared. And I think some of that can be achieved through the informal and, just raising awareness of and kind of making those kind of informal networks happen. But I think it can be accelerated through investment from from statutory agencies into formal partnerships and knowledge sharing. It happens, as I say, in other areas. It happens between academic partners and large-scale enterprises and SMEs. We see a lot of that in Ireland in the last few years, funded through Department of Enterprise and supported through agencies like SkillNet, Enterprise Ireland. And those formal knowledge sharing and kind of innovation sharing opportunities, I think, could be replicated, but involving CSOs, and would bring about kind of an acceleration of that knowledge sharing. And I think that's one thing we've been advocating for at a national level in Ireland, is that support for social innovation, if you like, being given the same level of respect and status as innovation in other industries.
Okay, thank you, Maria. That's a very good point. The status of social innovation. Andrew, I mean, based on what Mairead has just described, I mean, who can help civil society organizations have these more formal relations? Who are their allies?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. So, who maybe it's who should be their allies rather than who are their allies. But I mean, I think, policymakers themselves should be key allies of civil society organizations, because these organizations can help government to achieve its own goals in the various ways that we've already been discussing. For example, providing knowledge and insight into the challenges faced by some of the people that are most in need of support in society. I mean, countries need to tap into those pools of talent, and civil society organizations can help them to do that. Also, by reaching out to those most in need and informing them about programs and services, and delivering skills programs and services, as we've already discussed. But I'm cognizant that while I say that policymakers should be key allies of civil society organizations, this is not always the case. I'm afraid that these organizations are often an afterthought, and when they are thought of, they're often primarily thought of as delivery agents and not as partners in the policy development process. I think that civil society organizations need to develop strategies to convince policymakers that they are natural allies, that they should perceive them as natural allies. We have already discussed what some of these means might be, including, for example, by raising policymakers aware of the range and impact of the work of these organizations. And once again, a national skills strategy, the sort of work that we do, can be an excellent vehicle for bringing government and stakeholders together in policy dialogue for a common purpose, and by extension help to build those and foster those longer-term productive relationships, partnerships between government and CSOs, which Siria has sort of talked about before, those sustainable kind of relationships. Those things don't happen immediately, and I think something like this can help to set the ball rolling, so to speak. Social partners, of course, should be important allies of civil society organizations. Aside from the important role that their organizations are playing in helping to ensure that employers have access to the skilled workers they need, and more individuals finding jobs, especially those who are are most disadvantaged. Besides all that, CSOs are also important employers themselves, as Mairead has mentioned. So engaging with these organizations should be of natural interest to employer associations and labor unions. And as Siria has alluded to, international organizations can also be important allies. They can, for example, help civil society organizations to generate and collect the evidence of their impact, which these organizations can then use to make the case for why they need to be included in public policy dialogue. And international organizations like my own can also help to remind countries when they're working with those countries that civil society organizations are important stakeholders and should be included in that policy dialogue. So I think all of the what we consider the typical partners, you could throw in academic institutions as well, as Mairead was talking about, are potentially important allies of civil society organizations. It's a matter of developing those connections, which takes time, having everybody understand the important role that civil society actors play, and yeah, it's building that long-term relationship, I suppose, that others have been speaking about.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So, if I've understood correctly from the different comments I've had, I mean, there is perhaps an opportunity or a need for capacity building of civil society organizations themselves to present themselves better at that policy level. Would you say that's the case?
I would say that's the case, yeah. And I think, if we look back over history over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been less support, I think, across countries for civil society actors. I think, there at one time was, across many countries, a sort of, there was more investment made in these organizations to build capacity, to lift the voices of certain disadvantaged populations. And I think over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen less of that. And I think we need to revisit that in the context of the many challenges that we see we're facing in society, and realize that, we're not going to get to these people and understand their challenges and opportunities and benefit by that if we don't understand their needs and if they don't get the skills that they need to participate in society the way governments might like them or other actors might like to. But that's going to mean working with those people who know them best, and it means that then they may need help with capacity building to do that, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Mairead, would you say, I mean, in your organization, do you undertake some capacity building training to make civil society organizations better policy advocates?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the areas of training that we would deliver, and other training providers within the civil society do address that. And there have been different initiatives over the years. I think Andrew is right. Some of the investment in that might have been greater at different periods. And there was at one point a lot of philanthropic funding that the sector in Ireland benefited from, and that allowed a huge kind of, I suppose, capacity building work to happen within the sector. There was an advocacy alliance at one point, and organisations came together to build that capacity. But that philanthropic funding came to an end, and I guess there has been a gap in that space. I think that there's a great interest in it. There's definitely and a lot of work happens with the small amount of resourcing that's available for dedicated advocacy work in the sector in Ireland, and it has had very important impacts. And I think we've seen that even in recent times within Irish the society. We've had a number of referenda to change our constitution, which have had a huge and the campaigns to bring those about had a huge contribution from civil society. So there's a lot of experience within the sector of positively influencing that kind of policy change. And we're very fortunate, I think, as well, that we have, compared to some of our I suppose, sister sectors in other countries, we have at least the benefit of more formal structures that have been in place for quite a while. but I think there's always room for improvement, and it's not always consistent across different areas of government. So policymakers in one department might well be very open to working with, or have an open door, if you like, for civil society actors. And then in another department, you might find that it's not so easy to actually participate. So that can be quite frustrating.
Okay, Mairead, I'm perhaps going to put you on the spot there, but I mean, is there a pattern? Would you say certain areas, ministries? Is it more education that tends to work more with civil society or industry?
I mean, I suppose I don't know whether it's to do with the sector, the area of policy itself. I think sometimes it can be depending on the wider political context, or the personalities of and priorities of maybe different ministerial appointments can have an impact. So it's very hard to say. I think that there's a pattern that's linked to the actual policy area itself. I think education has been an area that civil society organisations in Ireland have had a huge impact in and have contributed to. I think our education system itself has quite a dependence, if you like, on civil society and a kind of voluntary effort throughout. So there's almost something baked into the DNA there. And yet there's still a road to go, in order to, I think, fully benefit from what civil society can contribute to the wider policy agenda here. But we have had some successes, and I think we have a new department of a relatively new Department of Further and Higher Education, which deals with this skills area. And I know that many civil society organisations have been engaging successfully and making very important calls for changes to policy in that space for the last few years since that new department was established. So we're definitely, it's not for want of energy and I think the resourcing that the civil society are willing to be there and to bring that energy to the table. And I think in some instances it is having very positive impacts.
Okay, great, thank you. Siria, well, referring now to ETF partner countries and also transition economies and societies more generally, where there are no doubt perhaps less formal structures, but are there perhaps maybe opportunities in that transition for civil society organizations?
I think, yes, opportunities are there because policymakers are recognizing that action is needed in order to ensure a continuum between education, training, skills development, and employment. And this is worth the investment. And by investment, I mean both financing of policies and policy measures, but also investment in good quality formulation of policies and careful implementation of these policies. And this is needed in order to address the wide diversity of people's needs and leave no one behind. And one current example is the Youth Guarantee. The Youth Guarantee is an initiative which is being now extended in countries that are candidates to the European Union. And the Youth Guarantee is precisely about the continuum between education, training, and employment, specifically for young people. This is a terrific opportunity for governments and civil society organizations to work closely together. So let's take this opportunity. About transition economies and societies, yes, we may also say that all the economies are in transition. Let's take the digital economy, which is already a reality, as well as the growing awareness about the negative effects of climate change. All this is bringing up new modes of production, new models of interaction between within value chains. So there is a new economy which hopefully is being shaped. So based on these common challenges, partner countries or international countries, I mean, everywhere, to develop national skills strategies is really a timely decision that all countries may take. And with the development of national skills strategies, there is the possibility to break barriers between different, as it was said, different departments within government, different ministries, different sectors, and really identify a convergence among different actors, among different institutions, on the importance of skills development of good quality for everyone.
Thank you, Siria. Just one final question, also out of my own curiosity, I have to say, but because we've heard earlier that civil society organizations, they can learn from the social partners, and also the importance of umbrella organizations and partnerships. It's about the representation, maybe at a European level, beyond the national level, at a European level. I mean, we've had discussions here with the main social partner in education, which represents, I think, 49 countries, bridging all of the EU member states and many of ETF's partner countries. We don't have something similar, as far as I'm aware, for civil society. Should we? And Mairead, would you like to take that question, perhaps?
Yes, I suppose in the wheel, we're eager to engage at the European level, and we have been involved in a number of European projects actually in this skills space and through Erasmus funding. And we're also a member of Social Economy Europe, which is a representative body for social economy organizations right across the EU. And we have been working with our colleagues in Social Economy Europe on engaging at the EU level. We've signed up for the Pact for Skills, and we're part of a large-scale partnership which is funded by the European Commission through Erasmus Plus to look at the skills needs in the social economy and to come up with a blueprint for skills across the social economy in Europe. And this is part of the industrial strategy. The social and proximity economy is one of the, I think, 15 or 16 industries as part of that strategy from the Commission. So there is at least that recognition is there. And I think as part of the Social Economy Action Plan, there is a new impetus behind recognising the importance and the status of the social economy within Europe. And I think we're working with colleagues to ensure that within the skills space that the social economy voice is heard. But again, it's another layer of resourcing and investment that's required in order to make that real and to kind of bring it back then to the national context as well.
Okay, thank you, Mairead. So you think, but it's evolving.
It's evolving, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We've received a question in our chat, which I will ask you, Andrew, for your first thoughts. So Rupa from Detroit, yes, has written, CSOs are able to do what they do because the people they serve trust them. In a way, they may not trust governments. So if civil societies build stronger partnerships with government, will they risk losing their credibility? It's a very good question, Rupa, and I'm curious to hear what Andrew will answer.
That's a very good question. I would hope not. I mean, this is one of the reasons why governments should be interested in working collaboratively with civil society organizations, because they do have the trust of those people, the people that governments want to target, that they want to get to help them to develop their skills, because they're under the pressures, skill shortage pressures, and other sorts of reasons, and also for social reasons as well, right? And so. I would hope that's not the case. I would hope that governments would recognize that this is in fact something that is beneficial. Now, whether that backfires on the civil society organizations, I can't answer that question. I would hope not. I mean, again, I think it's important that the civil society organizations do not allow themselves just become, I suppose, an instrument. So I think a lot of it's in the hands of the civil society organizations to play a role in as a partner with government, but not become just an instrument of government. So I think that's civil society organizations themselves will have to play a role in ensuring they're not simply instrumentalized, I suppose, for lack of a better word of phrasing.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Siria, would you have something to add there?
Yes, I mean, we have the example talking about the European level of important platforms like the Lifelong Learning Platform, the European Association for Education of Adults, Civil Society Europe, which are umbrella organizations. These are networks of networks, in fact, that are able to interact with decision makers in Brussels, so to say, and even an important achievement was the creation of interparliamentary discussion of thematic groups on lifelong learning, bringing together MEPs from different political groups. So there is a certain level of interaction, although, as you have said, that there is no full representation or structure or organized representation there. And the question of RUPA is, what if this happens? Then they lose, connection with. Well, let's look at social partners. They engage in a social dialogue in an institutionalized manner. Have they lost the confidence of their members? I don't think so. They bring the voice of their members up to the, at the table of negotiation. So why civil society organization could not do something similar? Often this is named as civil dialogue, just to make a difference with social dialogue. So the mechanism exists, and it doesn't mean that organizations shall necessarily lose their independence. However, the question is fair and the point is very valid, because in fact, what if this independence is lost or hidden, and it gets blurred onto during the negotiations? So it's very, very important for not only us, but civil society organizations themselves to remind of their independence and leave that certain, say, degree of criticism and healthy criticism vis-a-vis the action of governments, because this is part of the value of what they are able to bring, even in the dialogue. So I would say both things can and should live together.
Thank you, Siria. I will turn then to Mairead and for the final comment, also in response to Rupa's question. Mairead, tell us from your experience in Ireland, is this the case? Is there a risk?
I mean, I think there is a risk. I think Rupa has identified it, but Siria and Andrew have spoken to, I think, the important element, which is the independence of civil society voice. And we have to be so careful to maintain sight of that, and I think to protect it. And that is something we've seen in, I think, again, in Ireland, the civil society actors are very conscious of the fact that the independence of civil society organizations is a very precious thing. And we know that in other countries in Europe and around the world, it is not, that independence has been threatened, has been impinged upon. And I think we need to be just very careful of and protective of it, and would hope that government actors that we would engage with would respect that. And I think, Denise, you asked earlier about sometimes conversations around the table with social partners might become difficult, and we just have to be aware that's not necessarily a bad thing, that respectful critique that Siria talked about is important, and that CSOs will bring maybe a different perspective to the table, and that those conversations, if we are all confident enough, we can have them and hopefully come out the better for it.
Okay, thank you, Mairead. We're coming to the end now, but we just have a few minutes, and I think we can take Sarah's question. In the realm of skills development, what measures do you employ to safeguard your interventions and programs from political biases? It's it's a deep question. I'm sure we could talk about it for a long time, but if I give each of you, let's say, 1 short minute to respond, I think maybe we can get some interesting comments. Andrew.
Well, I mean, I think whether you're a policymaker, whether you're an international organization, a government, or a civil society organization, you have to give evidence-based policy. You give the interpretation that you think is accurate based on available evidence, and it's up. Of course, politicians will make decisions on the basis of that and other information, and all that you can do is give the best information you have and hope that that's acted upon.
Okay, thank you. Siria?
Well, I would say these questions brings together elements that we have touched upon. I mean, partly is about maintaining the independence, and also to continuously develop the technical and expert capacity, through training and self-awareness and updating and connecting with networks internationally in order to learn how to deal with sometimes difficult situations where governments may indeed try to co-opt the opinions and the positions of civil society organization for their own benefits. So it's part of the roles. And I want to say that it's very important always to remind oneself about the differences of roles, and not to blur, the say the position of a government with the position of a non-governmental organization. So it's about independence, it's about work on evidence, remaining technical, it's about capacities, about continuous learning on how to deal with difficult situations and networking with others in order to exchange experience and also develop practice on how to deal with difficult situations.
Okay, thank you, Siria. Mairead, final comment from you.
Well, I'd agree with what Andrew and Siria have said. There's a lot in it, but I guess 2 simple things would be to be very clear on the mission of the organization and to always keep that in mind, and to listen to the community that you serve. So if you keep very close to the community that you serve, whether that's a local or a national or whatever the particulars of that, then that will help to steer you in the right direction. And if you find that you're being buffeted by the political biases, then at least you might be able to recognize it in time to act in the ways that Siria has helpfully outlined as well.
Thank you. Big, huge thanks to our guests, to Mairead, to Andrew, to Siria, and to you, our audience, for your very interesting questions. Thank you. It's been a great discussion. We can leave it there.